Welcome to Excel magic trick number 1472. Hey, in this video, we got to see how to count between an upper and lower limit. We'll see how to use COUNTIFs for that. And then we need to see how to count above and below an upper and lower limit. And we'll see how to use two COUNTIFs for that. Now, we actually have 7 awesome examples, and all of them will concern counting between an upper and lower limit and then counting above and below an upper limit. Now, we want to go over to the sheet 1472. Here's our data set. We have student names and the scores. Now, our first example, we want to count between the lower and upper limit. Now, our lower limit is 35, and the upper limit is 50. Now, I've already put the comparative operators. In fact, I'm going to delete this. I already put the comparative operator and the number in the cell. Notice if I type a 35, that's a number, and enter that into the cell, it's properly aligned to the right, which means it's a number. As soon as I add the comparative operator, greater than, that means I have to find a number over here that's bigger than this 35. But as soon as I put the comparative operator and number together in a cell, it's immediately aligned to the left, which means Excel thinks that it's text, which when we use COUNTIFs, SUMIFs, AVERAGEIFs, and similar functions, when you have comparative operators, they actually have to be text. So that will work fine. Later in this video, we'll see how to build a similar construction without putting the comparative operator in the cell. But here we go, lower and upper limit. If we want to count, it's a simple matter of using the COUNTIFs function. COUNTIFs requires criteria range and then the criteria. Since we have 1, 2 conditions or criteria, we're going to have to put in criteria range 1, criteria 1, then criteria range 2, criteria 2. All right, let's do this. I'm going to highlight the numbers, the entire column. There it is, criteria range 1, comma to get to the next argument. Criteria, well, the first condition is greater than 35, the lower limit, comma. And there's our criteria range 2. Since both conditions are being applied to the same column, that means each number will have to meet both conditions. I'm going to highlight the column again, comma. Criteria 2, less than 50. Now, when you, and I'm going to close parentheses, when you use COUNTIFs and you have more than one condition, that means you're doing an AND logical test. That means each number has to meet both conditions. So when I look at 35, I have to ask 2 questions. Are you 35 greater than 35? False. Are you less than 50? True. Because I don't get both trues, the 35 is not counted. Now I go on to the second number. An AND logical test means we have to get 2 trues for both conditions. So I'm asking the question of 49. Are you greater than 35? True. 49, are you less than 50? True. So that gets counted. It does that for every single number in the column. And that's it. COUNTIFs, when I hit Enter, there is the count. And if we manually went through and did it, that meets both conditions. So does this one. Notice 50 and 35 do not, because the lower and upper limit are not included. As I keep looking down, these are all false, false, false. This is the only other number, 43, that falls between 35 and 50. Now, if you want to include the equal sign, no problem. We can just edit the criteria. I'm going to type an equal sign. Notice we have to string together 2 comparative operators, and the equal sign always comes last. So greater than equal, that will work. Enter. And I want to do that here also, equal sign. Enter. And now I get a count of 5 because 35 and 50 are now included. Now I'm going to use Control-Z to undo, undo. Now, COUNTIFs is fine. It's preferable because it is applicable in more situations than our next function that we're going to see, DCOUNT. Now let's just try this. DCOUNT equals D There's a bunch of database functions, dsum, dstandard deviation, and of course DCOUNT, which counts numbers, and DCOUNT, which counts not empty cells. So I'm going to try DCOUNT. Now, DCOUNT requires a database. That means you have to have field names at the top of the columns. That's the first requirement that COUNTIFs would not require. COUNTIFs doesn't care if there's field names at the top. But DCOUNT and all the D functions do. So we have to highlight the database, which is field names at the top, records and rows. Now, comma. DCOUNT and all the D functions needs to know which column or field it's going to use for counting. Well, we want to count from the score column. Well, notice I already have the name of the field here, so I can click it like that as a cell reference. You can also, since it's a field name, if you put it in double quotes like that, that will work for field, either the cell reference or the name in double quotes. Or you can count on your fingers, 1, 2. It's the second column in the database, so you could type a 2. All database functions will work like that when you get to the field argument. Now, I'm going to go ahead and use my cell reference right there, comma. Criteria. This is what's totally different than COUNTIFs. You have to have the actual field names listed and then the criteria below. For an AND logical test, you have to put the conditions next to each other on the same row. Later in the video, when we see an OR logical test, you'll see you still need the field name, but OR criteria goes on to different rows. All right, so we have to have repeated field names and then the AND conditions listed on the same row. And that will work. Close parentheses and enter. Now, the biggest drawback to DCOUNT is this criteria area. And look at this example over here. If I want to create a formula and copy it down, DCOUNT is not going to do that. There's no way to set up this condition or criteria with field names at the top of the conditions or criteria and copy it down. So that really is the biggest advantage of COUNTIFs. And it's really why most of the time, if we have a single cell or we're copying, we just use COUNTIFs all the time when we're counting. All right, here's how to do it. 2 things. If we need to copy and when we don't have the comparative operator in the cell. Equals, well, I still have to use COUNTIFs. Criteria range, I'm going to highlight the numbers. Now, if I highlight the numbers, since I'm copying the formula down, I need to lock these with the $ so they don't move as I copy down. So I hit the F4 key, comma. Criteria, well, I can't just click on 35 because then it would say you have to be exactly equal to 35. So I have to type the comparative operator into the formula. Double quotes, greater than double quotes. Remember, earlier we said it had to be text for COUNTIFs to understand when it has a comparative operator, so we have to put it in double quotes. Then we have to use the join symbol, ampersand, shift 7, and click on the lower limit, the right lower limit, comma. Criteria range, I'm highlighting the scores. I'm hitting the F4 key, comma. Now I need the comparative operator in double quotes. This is the upper limit, so I have to say less than. Then join it, and I'm going to put the upper limit in as a relative cell reference. And that formula will work. Close parentheses, Control Enter, double click and send it down. Now I want to click in the last cell because I copied it down a column, and I'm going to use F2 key to put it in edit mode and verify that all the cell references are correct. Now, when would you want to put the comparative operator in the formula? Because this is much more complicated than we did over here. Well, anytime you're using the numbers in other formulas, like maybe you have text formula labels, or you're using these numbers in other formulas and you need the number, then you got to put the comparative operator. All right, so there's 3 ways: COUNTIFs, DCOUNT, and COUNTIFs with the comparative operator in the formula and the range is locked. Now, what do we do in our next example if we want to count above and below the upper and lower limit? So, for example, here's the upper limit. I need to find everything bigger than 50. But then for the lower limit, I need to find everything less than 35. Whoops, I have the labels incorrect. If this is everything over here less than 35, this is really the upper limit. So I'm going to change these labels. Change this one too. Okay, so our goal is with this condition or criteria, find all the numbers that are less than this upper limit of 35. And then we need to look through the same set of numbers and find all the numbers that are greater than 50. Now, the problem with this kind of setup is most of the time the language we use to describe it. Because you might describe it like, hey, find all the numbers less than 35 and all the numbers greater than 50. The problem with that is I use the word and. This is not an and logical test. This is an or logical test. We're trying to find all the numbers that match this condition or the second condition. Now, what that means is that we have to look through this column of numbers and ask two questions in an or logical test. So for each number, I have to ask two questions. Hey, number, are you less than 35? False. Or, hey, number, are you greater than 50? False. So that's not included. We do not count that number. We get two falses all the way down here. We ask those two questions. Are you less than 35? False. Or are you greater than 50? True. Because we get a single true, that number is counted. Now notice that's different than what we did over here. Over here, we had to get true, true for our and logical test in order for the number to be included. But when we run an or logical test, we have to get just one true in order to be counted. If we tried to use COUNTIFs and put both of these in as an and logical test, we'd always get 0 because there is no number that is simultaneously less than 35 and greater than 50. Now, when we have an or logical test, there are a few ways we can do this. We can use the COUNTIFs. Now, criteria range 1, I'm going to highlight all the numbers, comma, and then I'm going to put the first condition in. Now, when I close parentheses and Control-Enter, you can see that COUNTIFs found 5 numbers in this column that are less than 35. I'm going to hit F2 to put this back in edit mode. Now, if we continued on here, of course, no numbers exist that meet both of those conditions. So what do? We just put a second COUNTIFs. Highlight the numbers, comma, and put the second condition. That way, two separate calculations will be made, and then they'll be added together. Now, I'm going to highlight this second COUNTIFs and use the F9 key to evaluate to show you that the second COUNTIFs found 5 numbers in this column that are greater than 50. Now, I'm going to Control-Z, and I want you to remember or notice when I highlight this and hit F9, oh, there's 2 5s in our formula. Control-Z. So, of course, when I hit Enter, it calculates the correct total of 10. Now, a second way we can do this is using DCOUNT. Remember, we were allowed to use DCOUNT, a database function up here on an AND logical test where the criteria were on the same row. With an OR logical test, you simply put the conditions or criteria under the field name on different rows. So you ready? Equals DCOUNT. We need our database. Field names in the first row, records in subsequent rows. Comma. The field, I'm going to click on score because it needs to count based on that column. Comma. Criteria, field name at the top, or conditions in different rows. Close parentheses. And when I hit Enter, it'll give us exactly the same number. Now, there is a third way to do this with COUNTIFs and SUMPRODUCT. Now, I'm going to show you this way, but I don't think this is a very efficient method when we only have 2 conditions for an OR logical test. This one starts to become more efficient when you have 3 or 4 or 5 criteria for your OR logical test. If we had 5 conditions or criteria, well, if we use this method, we'd have to have 5 COUNTIFs. This method actually would definitely be the most efficient if we had 5. But remember, DCOUNT can't be copied down a column. So I'm going to show you this way here. And we'll learn something cool about the COUNTIFS function. Now, COUNTIFS, criteria range, we're looking at the score column. Comma, criteria. Normally, we put a single condition. And as we saw up in this formula, COUNTIFS will deliver a single answer, which is 5. But watch this. If I put 2 conditions into criteria 1, COUNTIFS is instructed to deliver 2 answers simultaneously, just as we saw up in this formula with 2 separate COUNTIFS, 5, 5. Now that we've stacked up the OR logical test criteria into criteria 1, when I come to the end, close parentheses, and hit the F9 key to evaluate, sure enough, it delivers both answers. Those are the counts. Now all we need to do is add them. Now, Control-Z, we actually have to learn some important terminology and concepts here about formulas. Because what did we do here? We didn't put a single item here. We put in multiple items. Because this is a function argument, this is called a function argument array operation. The word array just means multiple items. Remember, we gave it multiple items, so when I hit F9, it delivers multiple answers. That's a resultant array of answers. Anytime your formula delivers a resultant array of answers, this is called an array formula. When you create array formulas, you have to worry about how you enter the formula into the cell. So I'm going to Control-Z. Remember, our goal is to add. So I'm going to put the SUM function, close parentheses. Now remember, I said you have to worry about how to enter it. If I just hit Enter, or F2, I did Control-Enter, that is not going to work. F2, you have to use a special keystroke to tell Excel that this is a special type of formula, an array formula. And the special keystroke is Control-Shift and Enter. When you do Control-Shift-Enter, then Excel knows to calculate this as an array formula. Now, as soon as you do Control-Shift-Enter, you have to look up to the formula bar and verify that the curly brackets are put in. You cannot type those curly brackets in. Those are put in automatically when you do Control-Shift-Enter. When you do Control-Shift-Enter, that's you telling Excel, hey, I'm doing an array formula. When Excel puts those curly brackets in, it's Excel telling you, hey, I understood that this was an array formula. Now, when it comes down here in F2, and notice SUM function, number 1 argument. Well, there's 450 functions in Excel, and there are 5 special functions that will calculate array formulas without that special keystroke. And the functions are, or one of them is, and I'm going to type a P after the end. I see SUMPRODUCT in my blue drop-down list, so I hit Tab. Now when I click inside SUMPRODUCT, I can read the argument name. It says Array1. This is one example of one function and one argument that can handle array operations without Control-Shift-Enter. Now, normally, SUMPRODUCT takes array, array, array. They can either be array operations like we have or regular ranges of values. Normally, SUMPRODUCT takes the array times the array. That's the product part, and then adds. But we are smart enough. If we have an array operation and we need to add it, we're just going to throw that array operation, that array formula, right into array1, and then SUMPRODUCT will just do the sum part. It'll just add it. And in that way, we can avoid that special keystroke Control-Shift-Enter. Now, if you're curious, the 5 functions in Excel that can do array operations without the special keystroke are SUMPRODUCT, lookup, index, aggregate, and chi-square test. Now, I actually wrote a whole book about array formulas called Control-Shift-Enter. All right, now if I hit Enter, it calculates perfect because SUMPRODUCT did its job. Now, our last example is we want to create our formula and copy it down where we have multiple upper and lower limits. Now, if I had the comparative operator in the cell, I could use the SUMPRODUCT COUNTIFS or the double COUNTIFS. Here, because I have just the numbers, I have to use two COUNTIFS. So COUNTIFS, criteria range, I highlight score, comma. Then the comparative operator in double quotes, that's less than, join symbol, ampersand, the lower limit as a relative cell reference. Close parentheses. Look at that. I forgot to lock this. So I'm going to click back inside COUNTIFS, click on criteria range 1 argument, and then hit the F4 key to lock it. Now I want to come to the end, plus COUNTIFS, highlight the range, F4 key to lock it, comma, in double quotes, greater than, in double quotes, ampersand, and there is the lower limit. Close parentheses. There's our two COUNTIFS. Control Enter. Double click and send it down. Go to the last cell and hit F2. I'm verifying that all of the ranges are correct. All right, wow, that was a lot of fun with counting between a lower and upper limit and above and below an upper and lower limit. We saw COUNTIFS that is designed to run an AND logical test. We saw DCOUNT, which is great if you can have your field names and criteria on the same row, but you can't copy DCOUNT down a column. We saw how to use COUNTIFS with locked ranges, and we saw how to put the comparative operator in the formula. Then we switched over to an OR logical test using multiple COUNTIFS. We saw how to use SUMPRODUCT and COUNTIFS and DCOUNT. And then, of course, using two COUNTIFS with locked range and comparative operators in the formula for copying it down the column. Now, if you like this video, be sure to click that thumbs up, leave a comment, and sub, because there's always lots more videos to come from Excel is Fun. We'll see you next video.